Good morning, everyone. Welcome back from spring break. I hope all of you had as good of a break as you possibly could have with what's going on with the coronavirus. Thanks for being here, and we'll try to make this work for the rest of the semester. We're going to need all your cooperation, so please tune in and get ready to take some notes. We're going to do our lecture today on painting. So, when we think of art, we pretty much think of painting. Painting is probably, from the earliest caveman work, humans have been expressing themselves with painting. And they're very closely related to drawing, and maybe even overlapping. Actually, some experts lump them together as being so close that we can't differentiate. And in a way, they're right. Painting is often drawing with paint. An example is Richter's abstract painting. Let's see if we can show it here. I'll try to make it. There we go. You can kind of see it in the background there. The medium paint and its application are a major part of this artist's message. The foreground features large, kind of lumpy, I don't know what, objects with thickly applied paint, which contrasts with a smooth gradient in the background sky area. Cave people used pigments from natural sources, plants, minerals, clay, even insects. Excuse me. Pigments used in the caves in France have lasted over 30,000 years. So it shows they have some longevity. Back in the day, painters mixed finely ground pigments by hand, right, with oil. Today, we can buy paint in tubes and jars. Paints consist of three components: pigment, which is the color; binder, which holds the pigment; and a vehicle, which spreads it around. So the binder is just like you would think of, like a school binder. It holds a bunch of stuff together. Well, that's what the binder does in paint with the pigment, which is the color. It holds it together, and the vehicle is what is used to spread it around. So oil paint, the binder is linseed oil, and the vehicle is turpentine or turpenoid, a replacement for turpentine. Tempera paints use egg yolk as the binder and water as the vehicle. Pigments are still often derived from natural sources: plant, animal, and mineral. Plus, now with advances in chemical technology, we also have synthetic pigments. They can extend the choice of colors available and the durability of the paint. The same pigments used in wet media, such as paint, are also used in dry media, such as drawing media, like colored pencils, for instance. Remember, medium means both the material and the technique. In painting, it can also mean the vehicle. Paints are normally applied to a flat surface, or what we call a support, okay? Such as canvas or stretched canvas for oils, and paper for watercolors. This is often called a ground. The ground is a prepared surface, or support. So these are two vocabulary words that you should know. Support is the surface that paint's applied to, and a prepared surface or support is called a ground. Okay, the support, usually canvas, must be prepared by priming. So just like you prepare a house or a car for a paint job, you also have to prepare your canvas with a primer. It avoids really expensive pigment, which is the most expensive part of the paint, the pigment, being wasted by soaking into the support. So in other words, if you were painting on wood, and you used your expensive pigment and all soaked in, you wouldn't have any color left, and you'd have to redo it. So the same is true with canvas. It's fabric and paint will soak into it, and then the color is lost. So the artist primes the surface. A prepared surface is called a ground. Okay. Watercolor for their ground uses paper. That is both the support and the ground. And other types of paint can use other supports, such as wood, etc. So let's talk about the different types of paint. So we have watercolor, that's one. We have tempera, it's two. We have oils, three. And acrylic or synthetic, four. Those are the four main types. There's a fifth type, but it's actually related to watercolor, and that's Fresco. Okay. Acrylics are available now, but for over 500 years, oils have been a favorite of artists. Recently and currently, artists use more acrylic paints for spraying, pouring, dripping, and other interesting methods of application. Each type of paint has its pros and cons. So let's talk about watercolor first. We'll take a look here at our screen. Here's a watercolor in the background. So watercolor, the pigment is suspended in a solution of water and gum arabic. That gum arabic is sap from acacia trees. It's like a resin that they use in it. It is applied to white paper. Usually it's a rag paper is used. Rag paper is actually made from cotton rags. It is the best. When I paint with watercolors, I use what is called a 300-pound watercolor sheet. It's a real thick paper, very thick and heavy. Rag paper is super absorbent. In fact, rag paper is what our money is made out of. And you know that you can wash money and it's very durable, right? That's made from rag paper, special rag paper. Watercolor is actually a staining technique. It is applied in thin, translucent washes or layers. Highlights in a painting, in a watercolor painting, use the white of the paper to show to demonstrate where light is touching an object. The viewer can see through the transparent pigment to the paper underneath, and that helps give it kind of a glow. Opaque or non-translucent watercolor is called gouache. That's also sometimes used. Watercolors can be quick and spontaneous and also well planned out. It's a favorite for plein air painters. Plein air means basically out in the air, outdoors, so that people who paint outdoors. Watercolor is great for landscapes and weather. It can be very dramatic. In this painting that you see behind me here, you can see its process if you look closely at it. From the pencil lines to the complete watercolor, the artist used bare paper to show the highlights and where light hits objects, and paint in various layers to describe the drama of weather. That's the artist here, Homer used the light and the color to capture the feeling of a calm before a storm. The properties of watercolor are it's fast drying, which makes it great for use in outdoors and to do quick sketches or painted sketches. It's transparent, and it's water-based, so it's easy to clean up. It's really preferred for spontaneous type of painting techniques. Gouache, which is the opaque watercolor, is also fast drying and water-based, but it is not transparent. Right? Gouache is similar to watercolor, but it has a little bit of chalk added, so it makes it an opaque paint. For centuries, gouache has been used for book illustrations and in traditional Persian art. More recently, it's been used mostly for graphic design, such as posters. It kind of lacks the spontaneity of the transparent watercolors. It continues to be popular today because it is easy to use, it's fast drying, and it is inexpensive. The painting here, I'm going to hold this up, see if we can see this one. This painting here, and we'll see, we'll try to see if that will make it go. Going Home. We saw this one at, in the, there, maybe you can see it better there. We saw this in class. Okay, so this is Going Home. This is done with gouache, and you can see how bright the colors are and how much detail that they can get into it. It's probably the paint that you can get the most detail without it being oils. So that's part of what's good about that. So let's look at our next watercolor here. So this is a Chinese watercolor. Let's see if we can bring that up, make that more, maybe not. There, now you can see it a little better there. So, and Chinese watercolor often uses black ink. They also use color, but we see more water-based black ink in it in China. And painting is thought to come, in China anyway, painting is thought to come from calligraphy instead of writing coming from painting, which is what we think of in our Western cultures. Asians regard black ink painting as a fully developed art, and it is highly honored in that culture. This example of Chinese painting behind me shows both wet and dry brush techniques, as well as washes and even calligraphy up in the corner here. You can see that the artist has written some words in calligraphy, two different styles of calligraphy. The artist demonstrates great skill with a wide variety of brush strokes in this painting. So let's move on to tempera. Here's an example of tempera. So tempera has been around for a long time. It was used by the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans, and up through the Middle Ages. It is still used by artists and kids today. Chances are, if you did finger painting as a kid, you used tempera. Tempera uses egg yolk and sometimes egg white as the binder. It has an opaque quality. When finished, it is slightly transparent and must be built up in layers. Tempera is luminous with a matte finish, which means a matte finish means it's not shiny, so it's kind of a flat finish. And it's usually painted on a ground of gesso. Gesso is a primer. And it's used for both tempera and oil painting and also for acrylic paint. And that's one type of primer, and probably the most common primer, gesso. That's Gesso, gesso. So the properties of tempera are that it's fast drying, it's luminous, it's good for detail, but it's not flexible when dry. So traditional tempera has a lot of steps for an artist to create a painting. A preliminary drawing or a cartoon has to be done. A cartoon in painting means a preliminary drawing. And it has to have an underpainting and many, many layers of paint built up upon each other to give it that look. It is good for very fine detail, but it lacks flexibility. So it must be painted onto a rigid surface such as wood. Canvas would because it's flexible, it's fabric and it's flexible. Once the tempera was dry, it would crack and flake off, basically, or peel off. So it would not be a good ground or a support for tempera. You can really see the detail in this painting here. It's a very naturalistic portrayal. And it does have that luminous quality that tempera is so prized for and why it was used for so many years. So let's contrast that with oil paint. So oil in Western art, basically oil has been a favorite for over 500 years. And it's because it's one of the most versatile of all paints. It is made from oil, and that's the binder, right? So the binder is oil mixed with pigments, and that's the color. So remember, we got pigment as the color. In the past, it's used walnut oil, sesame oil, poppy seed, and linseed oils, all plant-based. Those were all used. Now it is usually linseed oil. That's the main oil that's used, mixed with the pigment. It was traditionally painted on wood with gesso, the primer, right, underneath, just like in tempera. But due to a remarkable ability to bend, to be flexible, fabric like canvas and linen are now the most common supports for oils. The flexibility of oils isn't just literal that it can bend, right? It is also flexible in technique and in results. So it can be both opaque, which means that you can build up paint to paint on for the background, or when thinned with a medium, such as oil, thinner, or even varnish. It can be applied in thin layers called glazes, which makes the oil painting seem to glow. And that's a specific property of oils. That glazes give depth to the painted surfaces by allowing light to pass through and reflect from the paint layers underneath. Thus, the glow. The glow is what makes it so cool. As you can see from this work behind me by Jan van Eyck, the thin layers of glazed paint give a real sense of depth to the painting. Even the glazing in the sky outside the windows creates an atmospheric perspective, so the distance seems real. Oils made this level of realism in painting possible. Before that, painting still looked, even with perspective, a little flat. The advantages of oils are that it's flexible, right, in more ways than one. It can be opaque or transparent. It's slow drying, which means that artist can take his or her time working on it. And it's good for a variety of different techniques. The flexibility of oil paints made larger paintings possible because it replaced wood panels that are really heavy with fabric stretched over a wood frame, which we call canvas now, and more portable because as stretched canvas is lightweight, you can carry it around with you, but canvas can also be taken off the frame and rolled up for transport. So that was a really big deal. Oil can be thick or thin. If it's thick, a thick application is called impasto. Impasto, impasto. And a lot of artists use painting wet on wet. It's a method, it's called direct painting, and that means that you don't allow the oil paint to dry. You keep working on it, and you're painting wet paint over wet paint. Okay. It's true for Rembrandt. Here in his self-portrait, you see the impasto, or the thick paint application of light and dark with very visible brush strokes. When you look up close, you can see there's brush strokes there. If you look at this painting, this is Auerbach's portrait. It also uses impasto technique, and both are strong images, real strong images. Let me go back and we'll look at that one. They're strong images when viewed from far away. Up close, when you look at it, it reveals the thick paint, the impasto, and kind of in this one, it looks like big globs of paint even. And brushstrokes, much bolder than Rembrandt's work. Impasto is very visually textured. So you have that feel of texture. Oil is so versatile that it can be used to create a wide variety of approaches to the medium. Here you have an artist using barely mixed paint, so there's not a lot of mixing. It's kind of straight from the tube to create an abstract or non-representational work that is where the artist is trying to kind of recreate emotional states. It is, in this case, very spontaneous and expressive. I would call it a loose style of painting. By contrast, this artist used the medium very differently. The colors are mixed. They're gradiated. The brushwork is precise. And the title of this is Escape Pod. Is influenced by animation, media, and tech for a real sci-fi feel. So all these are oil, and all these are very different. So we're looking at this one, that one, Rembrandt, and of course Van Eyck. The pros for oil paints are it's flexible, it's slow drying, and there's a lot of variety to it. So, and you can have very precise techniques in any of these types of paintings. The cons are it's messy cleanup. You have to use turpentine. You can't clean up with water. Well, the con is also it's slow drying. So if you want to work fast, that's not the one for you. So let's talk about acrylic. So acrylic is modern and awesome in many ways, anyway. It is also flexible. The pigment is suspended in acrylic polymer medium. And it's a fast-drying, flexible film. They are cleaned up with water and thinned with water, but are waterproof when dry. The colors can be intense and rarely darken or yellow, as oils can sometimes do due to the type of oil that's in them, like linseed oil can turn kind of yellowish and dark over many, many years. So fast drying is great, but it can limit the blending that can be done with the paints. You can't do a lot of wet on wet work with acrylics. Layering is faster though, so you can do layering much faster than you could with tempera or oils because of the fast, the quickness of it drying. And because of that, acrylics work best with very little blending. Acrylics are also great for airbrushes, a very popular method, as you might know, especially if the artist doesn't like or want brush strokes in the painting. It gives a really smooth surface. Graffiti artists also like airbrushes for the fine detail that they provide. So the final type of paint. So here's another example of acrylics. Let's see. And you can see the precise detail in this one. It has a very realistic look, and the colors are very bright. So that's one of the things with acrylics. You often have a more choice of color. There's a lot more vibrant color going on there. Very popular. And so now we're going to go to the final type of paint, which is fresco, or buon fresco. It is an ancient technique used in all ancient cultures, where pigment is suspended in water, right, similar to watercolor, and then applied to damp wall plaster. It soaks into the plaster and actually becomes part of the wall, leaving a durable, we'll put quotes, painted surface, right? The artist must work fast, and only enough plaster for one day's work can be applied at one time. Joints usually follow some major part of the mural. So you can see there's probably a joint like right there around the back of this man and its detail. So he can only the artist can only work on a small amount of plaster at a time. The technique is that you must the artist must make a life size. We call it a cartoon, which is a preparatory drawing, and it's prepared in advance, and that has to be the full size of the wall. That cartoon is transferred to the newly laid plaster, and the plaster is made of lime and plaster together. So it's a special type of fresco plaster. The lime and the plaster bind with a pigment, which is much like watercolor staining techniques, right? So it binds with that pigment into the wall, so the painting actually becomes part of the wall. Whoops. Let me turn this phone off. Sorry, folks. Give me just a sec. Okay. Sorry for the interruption. We'll get right back to the lecture here. So the painting becomes part of the wall. This is one of Diego Rivera's frescoes, for fresco murals, I should say. It is in the Detroit. It's the Detroit industry, and the chemical reaction of the lime with the air is slow. It's really slow. So the colors don't reach their greatest intensity for 50 to 100 years after the painting. So once the work is completed, it takes 50 to 100 years for the colors to reach their true intensity. The process is so slow. Diego Rivera would work 12 to 16 hours every day to complete just 2 square yards of wall. Oftentimes he would work 20 hours a day or 24 hours in the full day and not sleep at all because he would be so intensely engaged in his work. Fresco has a luminous color and a permanence that make it perfect for large murals. Other paints can be used for murals, but none of them soak into the wall, into the plaster, like fresco does. And that's why it's the best for these large wall-size murals. Fresco has been used all over the world for at least 4,000 years, and that means in all cultures arosistine the world. The Sistine Chapel is painted in fresco by Michelangelo. After the Renaissance, it was pretty much outshone by oil painting, and that was because of fresco's lack of flexibility. Right, you couldn't transport it; it had to be in a permanent spot. Diego Rivera, just as a quick little heads up on history, was essentially a Cubist painter. When he returned from Mexico to Paris after the Mexican Revolution, he invented a style based on Mayan glyphs in order to get work from the government. Because when he first got back, the government looked at his work and said, people are not going to understand what this is about. Cubists, such as Picasso, were definitely not an artist that was, or an art form that was easily understood by the average person, and most people didn't like it. So Diego, in order to get any work whatsoever, was forced to do something different than that, and so he went to he drew his inspiration from classic indigenous art, such as the Mayan art and glyphs, and set about making murals all over Mexico to educate the people about their history. Right, so he was that was something the government was really wanted to educate people who were illiterate, right, and couldn't read or write, about the real history of their country. Right, so focusing a lot more on the indigenous peoples as well. In fact, we have some of Diego Rivera's murals in San Francisco, and we also have a local connection to Diego here at the Steinbeck Post Office on Alisal Street. So if you've ever been to that post office, you'll see there's two woodcuts up high up on the wall in the lobby there. One is a man and a horse, and I think the other is a man and a cow, or cattle. And those are done by a guy named Richard O'Hanlon. He's passed away, some time ago. But he was a San Francisco artist. And when Diego Rivera came to paint murals in San Francisco, he asked for an apprentice, and the apprentice was given to him by the local art school. And the guy's name was Richard O'Hanlon, right? Same guy as in the Salinas post office murals. And so Richard O'Hanlon had to grind pigment, because that's, of course, he was making a fresco mural, so he needed to grind pigment by hand. He took care of any kind of correspondence that Diego had. And he also had to teach Frida Kahlo, Diego's wife, English, because she wanted to go shopping at the local markets, and she needed enough English to buy food so she could cook for Diego. One of the things that she did for him was to bring him basically breakfast, lunch, and dinner at his work site while he was working on the mural, so that he could eat and still carry on with his work. So that's our little local connection with Diego Rivera right here at the Salinas Post Office. So that's it for the lecture on painting. I'm going to show you now my notes that, remember I told you if I write it on the board that you should write it down because it might be important. It might be on a test. So to end, I'm going to put the notes on the screen so you can see the notes. And we will see you next class. See if we can see it better. Hang on just a sec, guys. There we go. You should be able to see the notes there. And if not, I'll take a photo and I'll send it to as well. So we'll have that for the notes. Oop, I don't think we need the dolly there, do we? Okay, so basically on the notes, you guys, it talks about the three components of paint: pigment, binder, and vehicle. The types of paint. Which is oil, tempera, watercolor, acrylic, and fresco, and a little bit of the information about what the binders are for each of them and how that works. So hopefully you're able to see all that. And if you have any questions, you can email me. We're going to figure out if we'll do a Google Hangout or something like that, or a Zoom. I'm not sure I like the Zoom that well, but we'll do our best to have a way to have a little discussion with this too. So thanks again for joining, and we will see you next lecture.